this poll that's put Labour at 14%, how much stock should we put in it? What's your read of it? Talk to me about it.
Let's not obsess over outliers, but let's not kid ourselves that the situation for Labour is incredibly bad. I would always recommend listeners, readers, and yourself to take stock in not just one poll, but all the polls, and particularly the Britain Elects poll tracker, which currently has Reform on 30%. So yes, Reform are very much in the lead. There's no question about that. Labour are still, albeit just, in second place. They're currently forecast to be on 19% if an election was held today. The Tories, they are not far from second. They're on 18% now. And the Greens, there is variety in where the Greens are right now. You have one pollster putting them on 11% or 10%, another putting them on 18%. They're currently on 14%, according to Britain Elects. The Lib Dems, who are only 0.2 points on the last election, are on 13%. It's a battle of the losers, really, because Reform are only 1 point higher than what Gordon Brown got in 2010. That's not really much of a verdict for them. But if an election was held today and no tactical voting was considered, you're looking at Reform on upwards of 400 seats, 350 to 400.
It's punchy. I want to talk about comparing this moment to previous Labour polling moments in a few moments' time. But Ben, could you just explain actually how is it that one pollster can put a party on 11% and another can put it on 18%? Is it differences in methodology, differences in weighting? How do you get that divergence?
It's the reality of a science test. Polling is a science. It's, you always remember when you were at school, how many times were you meant to do a test? Not once, 3 times, right? And that is basically polling. A poll has a margin for error for a reason. They random sample a portion of the country, and history says they will normally get that within 3 percentage points or thereabouts. Something to bear in mind is that what pollsters might be struggling with now is the kind of people they're getting. So who is most likely to answer a poll? It's probably people who are very online, very logged on, very determined to tell you their opinion. And so what pollsters do is they choose their sample. The problem is, and I wish not to besmirch certain pollsters, but some samples are quite poorly sourced. Imagine, for instance, if you spoke to 1,000 to 2,000 people and the thing they have in common is they are a Tesco Club Card member. All right, that's already a soiled sample. You can make it as representative as possible, but the fact they have that Tesco Club Card membership in common has already skewed and spoiled the sample. That happens. That's just but one example of the kind of sampling you can get. It really does vary. The more logged on you are, the more willing I think you are to say you'll go for more radical options. So about 2 or 3 years ago, Reform were polling 5 to 10%, but weren't getting anything like that in the opinion in by-elections and council elections. And what I wrote, and was, I think, borne out to be true, was that very logged on people were saying they were Reform. Too many pollsters are relying on online samples. And as a consequence, it's over promoting them. Then, of course, it changed. Things change, and right now we're seeing really a debate on where the Greens are. They're either on 18 or 14 or 11%, and I think it's healthy. It's healthy that there's variation, I think, actually.
Okay, let's visit the context then. Can you give us some historical shape on where Labour is right now, how it compares to what they've done in the past? Like, give us the backstory.
Yeah. So what did I say Labour was on there? On 19%?
Yeah.
When was the last time Labour was on 19%? Can you guess?
I'm going to say, does it predate sort of modern polling methods?
The answer, how would I answer that? No, because it's never.
Right,
because it's really never. The only time Labour came close was in the midst of the expenses scandal, when they really fell far, when the polling started to mess with the European elections of 2009. And that was when Labour really started to hit 20%. And that was it. Even, when Labour was competing with the STP Liberal Alliance, they weren't polling as bad as this. This is rock bottom for them, and I don't think it's necessarily even the bottom for them. This is in voting intentions. Something to bear in mind is that the type of people who say they are turning out is changing somewhat. So when you think of the average voter, who do you think? You think of middle-class Meg, right? You think of someone who lives in a semi-detached home, paying a mortgage. They're relatively centrist. They like David Cameron, but they like controls on immigration. and a smidgen of them just voted Leave more than Remain. Those types of voters who moved wholesale to Labour, which is what gave Labour its such, stonking majority, a lot of them are now saying, I don't want to do voting anymore. That's not normal. These kinds of people have been the bread and butter of a campaign's voters. So what you're seeing actually in certain middle-class suburbia, in council elections, by-elections and others, you're seeing turnout there just drift or fall completely. And what you're seeing in places where there's loads of social housing, loads of council housing, turnout staying the same or just going up a little bit. We're starting to see it now. If you look at council by-elections that Reform wins, turnout is either staying the same or going up. If you look at seats where Labour just about holds on, or the Greens gain, turnout is falling. Something to bear in mind. Reform's advanced in the opinion polls right now. That 30% is from bringing new people out to vote. Or to an extent, it's, Boris Johnson Tories who stayed at home for Rishi now coming back out. It's a real mix of those two. That's who Reform are bringing out. The Green surge, meanwhile, is of those who voted in 2024. They're not bringing any new people out yet, which I think, when we think of it like a youthful revolution, it's not showing up in that way yet.
It can be a recipe for really volatile electoral results. Right. If there's this cohort of people who previously haven't participated electorally, haven't voted, certainly haven't answered a poll in the past, you can create these really powerful political campaigns, can't you? I mean, the one that people probably reach for in recent memory is probably Brexit, right? The effort to vote Leave to access and turn out these voters who wouldn't typically vote in general elections. It can, difficult thing to do if you can find these people, if you can convince them, you can motivate them. You can create a campaign with real momentum and real energy.
Yeah, and to tell you the truth, I think Labour campaigns, Tory campaigns, Liberal, Green, I have to say they're kind of asking for it already. And I'll just give you an example. I don't know if you've ever had experience campaigning yourself or knocking doors for a political party. I do. People who know my background know I do. And what political campaigns do, is they knock on the doors of people who have a history of voting. You get a marked register, which, logs who's voted. You rely on them. You go out to them because they have the highest probability of voting. You have a limited number of activists. You have about a dozen activists for a seat of 10,000, 20,000 people. You have to work on those who are voting, keep them up to date, keep them like, hello, Mrs. Muggins, how are you voting? You all right? Do you need any help? And then you make sure come election time, you try and get them out. And you leave those who are not registered to vote in the dust. You leave those who have a history of not voting in the dust. What we saw in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election, what we're seeing in many by-elections, particularly in St Helens that I paid a lot of attention to, is that Reform are knocking up, basically, emailing, messaging, spamming the people who the marked register has no data on, or the electoral register has no data on. If there's a household and it's said, this person isn't registered to vote here, Reform are going there. And they're saying, you've been ignored, you've been lied to, because you have been ignored. Campaigns wouldn't focus on you. Register to vote for us, stay with us, stay loyal with us, and the dividends will be paid. In Runcorn and Helsby, you saw turnout in the posh Tory areas stay the same or drift a little bit. And then you saw in Runcorn proper, which isn't exactly the richest place on earth, you saw turnout relative to the poorer, richer areas sort of go up a little bit. So, normally richer areas turn out more than poorer. Well, it wasn't really like that in Runcorn. That's Reform strategy.
Can we have a word on personal approval ratings, Ben?
Oh, well, I hope Keir Starmer's not listening, really. And what was it that Ed Miliband said? Was it the New Statesman reception? If we all listen to polls,
I'd be the Prime Minister.
Be in.
Yeah. I'd be in year 10 or something like that. Yeah. He said it's a snapshot, not a forecast. Yeah.
I mean, on the surface, yes, Edward, very correct. Well done. However, the polls throughout all his time had him behind David Cameron throughout his entire time as Labour leader. And his, the number of people who trusted Miliband and Labour with the economy was never ahead of the Tories. It's never just look at voting intention. Look beyond that. Look at the best party in the economy and look at leadership, which of course brings us to dear Sir Keir. It's poor. It's incredibly poor. So much so I've got a book out. I bought one of the books out to have a look at going back to Neville Chamberlain. So just two benchmarks you need to know. Minus 27 net approval is what Neville Chamberlain had at the Norway debate. So if you remember the Second World War, I don't know, none of us lived that long. Why am I inferring that?
No, we have knowledge. We've got knowledge. We've got a common knowledge base, though.
Yeah, good. We have that. Very terrible campaign in Norway for the Allies. That was very much Chamberlain's downfall, even though Churchill had a part to play in it. And minus 27 was the net approval for Mr. Chamberlain then. Minus 50 is what Margaret Thatcher had in the midst of the poll tax riots. Keir Starmer right now is on minus 46. Okay? So basically, Starmer is doing almost as bad as Thatcher was in the midst of the poll tax riots. And Thatcher, by the way, never came anywhere close to minus 50. Starmer has been treading that for almost 100 days now. We're into 500 and something days of Starmer's time in number 10. At this point, Tony Blair was on plus 39. John Major was on plus 11. Margaret Thatcher was on minus 11. Theresa May, minus 20. David Cameron, minus 10. Rishi Sunak, minus 28. Gordon Brown, only just now at this point was he starting to be seen as saving the world. He was on minus 37. Starmer is below all that. He is the worst performing premier at this point in time in post-war history.
In those terms, it sounds quite bad. But if you permit me to sup from my cup of cope that's here next to me right now, Ben, might I be able to formulate some type of argument that says, yes, all very well and good, but politics has changed. We live in the world of the smartphone, and if Reform are able to explode in popularity, and I think that obviously doesn't necessarily give full credit to UKIP that came before, Brexit Party that came before, etc. But nevertheless, the volatility we've already discussed, that to apply the iron laws, the received wisdom, the things that we previously took for granted and say are irrecoverable, that perhaps the paradigm has changed, and there is scope, there is a possibility, there is a glimmer. Would you find that convincing? Would that? I can see you on the screen, and I think there's some thoughts are percolating, but you don't look convinced.
Yeah, I think I was asked this once. I was giving a talk. Can Labour win again? Labour can most certainly win again, but I think we got to appreciate in this first past the post democracy, we are awfully presidential. We act awfully presidential, and we're never going to get away from that. Yes, we're voting for the member of parliament. Yes, there's a personal vote. Yes, that's probably 1,000 votes out of a possible 20,000, 30,000 votes. But we are often thinking of the premier. And my answer, I think, what was it, 3, 4, 5 months ago, was yes, Labour can win again, but Keir Starmer can't. We are more fluid than we've ever been. Party loyalties are as non-existent as they've ever been. I once wrote in 2021, we are a nation of swingers, thanks to Boris Johnson, thanks to Nigel Farage, thanks to Alex Salmond, thanks to UKIP. We have become so teased out by other parties that loyalty is gone. We are everywhere now. And so this idea of returning home isn't as great as it used to be. Normally, right, what have we got now? Half the Labour base is really annoyed with Labour, and they're either staying at home or they're going to move into other parties. Historically, I wouldn't say it's par for the course. It's pretty low, but it's it's not the worst. It's not insane. Okay. Often you have about 1/10 of those that you've lost, 1/10 to the 5th of those that you've lost coming back by general election time. That happened in 2005 after Iraq for Labour. That happened in 2010 for Labour. That happened in 2015 for the Tories, around about 1/5 of their vote that was really annoyed with them, halfway through the parliament, coming back for them. And it stopped happening after 2019. It didn't happen in 2024. A lot of those Tories who were really annoyed with the Tories started staying home, or rather they stayed with the position they said they would move to in a midterm parliament. Okay, with those loyalties, the guarantee that they would return has certainly frayed. Labour has nothing going for it anymore, or rather Starmer has nothing going for him anymore. Starmer's position on the economy, it's 1/5 of us trust Labour, which actually is better than the economy, but it's still low. Okay, Starmer has record low approval ratings, and the share is incredibly poor. And I don't understand where Labour's strategy is to put Keir Starmer on every blooming advert going. It's the worst thing they could possibly do. On adverts in the Runcorn and Helsby by-election that they lost by 6 or 7 votes to Reform. Adverts with Starmer on, but Starmer was never on the doorstep. Why? Who decided that? And for what reason?
Valid questions. Very important questions, I think. Okay, let's take a quick break. In the second half, why don't we talk a little bit about how these numbers translate to seats in local elections, seats in projected general elections. Let's take a quick break there. Okay, let's talk about seats. Maybe should the jumping off point be May? Should we start in May? I think that's a reasonable place for us to kick things off.
Jumping off of Keir, or
well, I think
yes. I think many Labour organisers and activists want that. Yes.
So, national polling, local elections, valid exercise, not worth engaging in. Talk to me about it.
Oh God. Again, to reiterate, we are more fluid than we've ever been. There's greater uncertainty here. The kinds of typical voters we rely on, they are the ones saying they're unsure about voting. And as a consequence, the forecasts you see right now are pretty much up in the air. But when we have by-elections, they do get borne out. The forecasts are not far off, at least if you look at the Britain Predicts model. Don't look at any others. So, look, the current numbers really vary. I know some say, Reform are going to get a majority, but Britain Predicts says this, that if an election was held now, and if you factor forever error in previous polls, Reform are looking at close to 300 seats, 260, 280, lower than what you normally see, but this is starting to factor for the fact that votes do coalesce around one or two. It is factoring for squeeze to an extent. But it's not, cutting off, it's not stopping Reform getting in. Because coming in second is Labour with between 120 and 150 seats. The Tories will get between 40 and 70. So what's that? You add the Tory plus the Reform numbers and you get a Reform-Tory coalition. Okay? Labour losing almost 300 seats, between 250 and 300. Lib Dems picking up a dozen or two, they're not far off reaching 100 seats. I wrote at their party conference, they could eye up 100. They could quite literally sleepwalk into 100 if an election was held now. And to tell you the truth, I think that is the most likely outcome at this point in time and at the next, because they're slow burn, aren't they, the Lib Dems? The Greens are the exciting one, I suppose, because we don't really know. But my forecast currently has them on between 14 and 23 seats. And they're also eyeing up a possible 50. Because you have so many inner city areas in which they're not far out, and you're having so many winners being decided with 30% of the vote. That's and maybe 1,000 votes between third and first. That's not normal, is it?
It's extraordinary. It's absolutely extraordinary. Okay, well let's talk about local elections then, and the Senedd and Scotland too. May's been talked about in sort of quite perilous apocalyptic terms for the Labour Party, right? It's particularly in relation to Starmer's leadership. People are saying that is the moment of maximum pressure, predicting, forecasting terrible results. I mean, Caerphilly, you were there. This is a place that Labour has. I mean, it runs in the blood of the people that live there, right? The South Wales valleys. People spoke about Scotland in this way previously, and obviously the SNP turns up. But in a world where Labour aren't in control in Wales, a further trouncing in Scotland, and let's say council losses in either direction to the Greens, possibly to Reform. At that moment, the political pressure, it probably is critical mass, isn't it, for the national leadership? If those results were to be borne out, it sort of looks insurmountable for Keir Starmer personally. Do you think?
Yeah. The natural reaction will be to say this is a midterm parliament protest and therefore everything will come back. But just as we've said throughout this podcast, these are not normal times. These abnormal times are our new normal. In Wales, you've got, look, Labour's always had 50% around about of the seats in the Senedd there. Okay, they're going up to a different system, a more proportional system, and they're going to be duly trounced as a result. They're on course to get around about a fifth of the seats, to go down from 50% to 20%. Plaid Cymru, they're on course to get around about 30, maybe a touch above, and Reform will get a third or above. So Reform will be the largest party. So if you add Plaid and Labour, you just about have a progressive coalition. You just about have the numbers to govern, and then add in the solitary Lib Dem and maybe the solitary Green, and you quids in. But you add in a third plus of Reform, and the Tories aren't exactly dead and buried there, and a right-wing coalition isn't far off. I would say we're in margin of error mode in Wales right now, where yes, a progressive alliance, so-called, is on course. But it's not unreasonable to think that if turnout amongst progressives is low, a right-wing party, a right-wing set of parties will be governing Wales after May next year. It's just something to prepare for. Scotland, the SNP are still ahead. They've been ahead. Oh, God, the only time they weren't ahead was the start of 2024 for the past 10 plus years. It's absolutely ridiculous that they have been ahead as long as they have, and unpopular for as long as they have at the same time. But, in Scotland, it's not unreasonable to assume that an SNP and Green deal is still odds on. It's just that these assumptions that every party Nigel Farage runs is an English nationalist party is for the birds. Because right now, Reform are polling about a fifth of the vote there. They never did that under UKIP. They never got close to a fifth under UKIP. This Reform phenomenon is very much a national phenomenon across the whole of England, Scotland and Wales. In the locals, 4,500 seats minimum. All of London is up. Good news for London journalists. You don't have to go far, do you? You've got the Sunderland counting on the night. Probably the first ward to declare will be a Reform gain in Sunderland unless Labour get their act together there. But my goodness me, you've had a whole fracas of the local Labour leader being, forced to resign and then replaced by someone from the National Executive. Welcome to the Labour Party. Absolute chaos in metropolitan England. So if you looked at a map, you've got Scotland, Wales, and everywhere that's urban in England, really, and Surrey, and bits of some mayoralties. But yeah, opportunities for the Greens there to flex their muscles in places like Hackney, which is one of their top targets. Maybe who will succeed Diane Abbott there as the MP there. Chaos is calling for Labour. Any bright spots for the Tories? I don't really see any. It's the smaller parties next May.
I reckon I could be convinced to stretch my legs. I could get myself down to Surrey for a broadcast, maybe, Ben. I think I might push myself that far. If Rob can transport the podcast studio in this nice comfy seat, you might catch me there. I also, in the first part of your answer, I really like the idea of the solitary Lib Dem as sort of a metaphor. We'll have to workshop how we work it into the podcast in future, but I just quite like the image.
Always in Wales. There's always a solitary Lib Dem in Wales now. They haven't come back. You know when the Lib Dems have recovered? We always like to think with the Lib Dems, they've returned to the West Country under Paddy Ashdown. That was where they always had strength now. But the average Lib Dem, the median Lib Dem, doesn't live in the West Country. He lives in the home counties. Mm-hmm. It's more Remainer. They are recovering in the West Country. They're recovering in slightly Leave areas, but not as much as they used to. So when we talk of this Lib Dem advance and they're eyeing up 100 seats, yeah, they are. But they still haven't solidified the West Country in the way they did.
Are there 100 Gales in Britain?
Gales?
Yeah, it's the posh bakery chain that I think the Gales strategy. So it's just get some Gales open in Somerset and see how it plays.
Yeah. Well, we've got one in Chester right now. No Lib Dems here though.
They're on the march though. They're coming. They're coming. Watch out, Ben. Watch out. The solitary Lib Dem marching up the road. Let's dial in then in this forecasty hypothetical world that we're currently inhabiting. Seems likely to happen. Bloodbath for the Labour Party, leadership contest, yada yada yada. Talk to me about the top contenders. Talk to me about how they stack up. I mean, the big names that we sort of are currently being spoken about: Burnham, obviously, Rayner, Wes Streeting, outside chance for Shabana Mahmood. Burnham, from what I've seen, is the runaway favourite within the Labour Party for Labour members. But obviously, you're not just the Prime Minister of the Labour Party, are you?
No, quite. And I think all this is dependent on if the Labour Party is capable of doing regicide to itself.
Yes.
And I don't think it is. It's always like, oh no, we've got to give Keir another chance. Really? Yeah, really? You're losing seats left, right and centre. You've lost Wales. First time in 100 years. Do something about it, my goodness sake. So successor, yes, Burnham is the front runner, but he's not an MP right now, and he's mayoralty because you're the mayor of Greater Manchester. You can't do what Boris Johnson did and become an MP at the same time, because mayor of Greater Manchester includes policing power, so you can't do it. Around about half the Labour membership want Burnham, a runaway favourite. When you exclude Burnham, it gets a bit muddier. If it was Starmer versus Wes Streeting, so if, for instance, as some were briefed long ago, Streeting challenged Starmer for the leadership, that would have been least ugly option wins. I have to say, Wes Streeting is not that popular amongst the rank and file. So if you look at the favourability, if you did the cabinet league table of amongst the Labour membership, around about only half the Labour membership still approve of Keir Starmer. There's still, he still has a so-called base, but that's only half the party. And then you poll Wes Streeting, and also it's half the base. And when I say that, by the way, I also mean half the base don't like him. Half the Labour base don't like Wes Streeting. Half the base aren't keen on Keir Starmer anymore. The only people who have, I would say, universal acclaim, even though it might just be for their portfolios, is Ed Miliband and Yvette Cooper to an extent. Maybe Shabana, but it's mostly Ed Miliband.